Olive Emerson didn't expect her afternoon shift at the department store to turn into absolute chaos. But that's exactly what happened when two customers started shouting at each other near the perfume counter. She had just finished folding a stack of sweaters when the yelling turned into shoving, and a display of cologne bottles went crashing to the floor. "Hey, stop that!" Olive rushed forward, hands raised. She wasn't sure what she was going to do. She was barely 5'4", and these two guys looked like they spent half their lives lifting weights, but she couldn't just stand there and let them trash the store. Before she could say anything else, a deep, commanding voice cut through the tension. "Enough!" The word wasn't shouted, but it held so much authority that both men froze mid-motion. Olive turned, and her breath caught. The man who had spoken was tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed in an impeccably tailored suit that probably cost more than her rent for a year. His dark hair was neatly styled, and his sharp gaze flicked between the two men with the kind of controlled intensity that made it clear he wasn't someone to mess with. "You're making a scene," he continued, his voice calm but firm. "Walk away before security gets involved." One of the men, red-faced and furious, opened his mouth to protest, but the other seemed to recognize who was speaking. His expression shifted from anger to something closer to panic. Without another word, he grabbed his friend's arm and dragged him towards the exit. Olive let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Wow," she muttered, "that was impressive." The man turned to her, his piercing blue eyes locking onto hers. "Are you all right?" she blinked, thrown off by the genuine concern in his voice. Yeah, just a little shaken up." He nodded, then glanced at the broken bottles on the floor. "Do you need help cleaning this up?" Olive almost laughed. She couldn't picture this man in his $1,000 suit getting down on his hands and knees to mop up cologne. "I think I've got it, but thanks." He studied her for a moment, then extended a hand. "Felix Easton." Her fingers hesitated before slipping into his. His grip was firm, warm. "Olive Emerson." "Olive," he repeated, as if testing the name. "You handled that well," she snorted. I froze, and then you swooped in like some kind of business world superhero. One corner of his mouth lifted. "I wouldn't call myself that, but I don't tolerate unnecessary chaos." Olive wasn't sure why her pulse fluttered at that. Maybe it was the way he looked at her, like he was actually interested in what she had to say. "Well, thanks again," she said, stepping back. "I should get this cleaned up before my manager has a meltdown." Felix hesitated, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a sleek black card. "If you ever need anything," he said, handing it to her, "call me." She stared at the card, then back at him. "Why would I need to call you?" Something flickered in his expression, something unreadable. "Just in case." And with that, he turned and walked away, leaving Olive standing there, still holding his card, her heart pounding for reasons she couldn't quite explain. Olive had planned to toss Felix Easton's card into the nearest trash bin. People like him, sharp suits, commanding presence, an aura of wealth that practically radiated off of them, didn't belong in her world, and she certainly didn't belong in theirs. Yet something stopped her. She stuffed it into her apron pocket instead, finishing her shift with the scent of expensive cologne lingering in the air. By the time she clocked out for the night, her feet ached, and the adrenaline from earlier had faded into exhaustion. The city streets were alive with their usual hum of traffic and distant music as she made her way to the bus stop. The department store job barely covered her bills, and she had another shift at the cafe in the morning. Sleep was a luxury she couldn't afford these days. As she waited for the bus, she pulled the black card from her pocket, studying the embossed letters of his name. Felix Easton. She had no idea what he did, but everything about him screamed influence, power. She shook her head, shoving the card away. It didn't matter. She'd never see him again. Except she did. The next afternoon, just as she finished refilling the sugar dispensers at the cafe, the door swung open, and there he was. Felix Easton. Olive nearly dropped the metal canister. He looked completely out of place in the small, cozy cafe, his tailored coat draped over one arm, his wristwatch catching the light as he scanned the room. His gaze landed on her. She straightened. "Did you get lost?" His lips twitched. "No." "I came to see you." Her heart did something inconvenient in her chest. Why? He stepped closer, the faint scent of cedar and something expensive clinging to him. I didn't like the way we left things yesterday. Olive folded her arms. We left things fine. You saved the day, handed me a mysterious business card, and disappeared. Felix studied her for a moment, then glanced at the cafe's menu scrawled on the chalkboard. What's good here? She blinked. You want to order something? That is what people do in cafes, isn't it? Olive huffed a laugh despite herself. I guess the pastries are fresh, coffee's strong. I'll take both, he said. Whatever you recommend. She turned to grab a plate, trying to ignore the way her hands felt slightly unsteady. Felix Easton was standing in her cafe, requesting her recommendation. It took effort, but she kept her voice casual as she placed a croissant on the counter. So do you make a habit of tracking down retail workers after brief encounters, or am I special? Felix accepted the pastry but didn't answer right away. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than before. You're different. Olive froze, searching his expression. There was something unreadable in his eyes, something she couldn't quite place. She cleared her throat. Well, that's vague. He took a slow sip of the coffee she placed in front of him. You didn't ask who I was, she frowned. Should I have? Most people do. Olive leaned against the counter. Let me guess, you're some big-shot CEO, real estate mogul, secret prince of a tiny country. Felix chuckled, a low and genuine sound. Nothing quite that dramatic. I own a consulting firm. She tilted her head. Consulting for what? Businesses, mergers, acquisitions. So you tell rich people how to get richer. His expression flickered with something she couldn't name, something like that. Olive nodded, wiping her hands on her apron. Well, Felix Easton, consulting extraordinaire, your coffee's on the house. His brows lifted slightly. Why? Because you saved my store from complete destruction yesterday, she said, shrugging. Consider it a thank you. He studied her for a long moment before setting his cup down. Then let me return the favor. Olive narrowed her eyes. What does that mean? Felix reached into his coat and pulled out a sleek leather wallet. A moment later, he placed a crisp bill on the counter. She frowned. That's way too much for a croissant and coffee. It's not for the coffee, he said simply. It's for your time. Her stomach twisted. My time, Felix met her gaze, steady and unwavering. Have dinner with me. Olive inhaled sharply. That's not necessary? I think it is, she swallowed. You don't even know me. I'd like to change that. There was something about the way he said it, like it wasn't a line, like he actually meant it, that sent her pulse skittering. Olive should have said no. She should have handed back the money and walked away, because men like Felix Easton didn't pursue women like her. But against all logic, she heard herself say, okay. Felix's expression remained unreadable, but there was a flicker of something in his gaze. Satisfaction, maybe. Tomorrow night, he said, sliding the bill toward her. I'll send a car. Olive hesitated before finally accepting the money, her fingers brushing his for the briefest second. She had no idea what she was getting herself into. But something told her that dinner with Felix Easton was going to change everything. The car that arrived for Olive the following evening was unlike anything she had ever stepped into before. It was sleek and black, the kind of luxury vehicle that seemed to glide rather than drive. The driver, a man in a crisp uniform, stepped out and opened the door for her without a word. She hesitated for a second, gripping the strap of her purse, before finally slipping into the plush leather seat. The door shut behind her with a soft click, enclosing her in silence and the faint scent of expensive cologne. Felix wasn't inside. A small part of her had expected him to be. Instead, the driver pulled into motion without so much as a glance her way, expertly navigating the city streets. Olive exhaled slowly, smoothing her dress over her knees. She had spent far too long debating what to wear, knowing that no matter what, she'd feel out of place in whatever world Felix belonged to. Eventually, she had settled on a simple black dress classic, understated, safe. By the time the car pulled up in front of an elegant restaurant with towering glass windows and golden-lit chandeliers visible from the street, her hands were clammy. The driver stepped out and opened her door once more. Mr. Easton is waiting inside. Olive swallowed hard and stepped out onto the sidewalk. The entrance to the restaurant was grand without being ostentatious, the kind of place where the wealthy gathered in hushed, effortless sophistication. And then there was her. She took a steadying breath and walked inside. Felix was already seated at a table near the back, dressed in another tailored suit that fit him like it had been designed specifically for him. When he saw her, he stood, his gaze sweeping over her in a way that sent a strange heat up Olive's spine. "You came," he said, his voice smooth, as if he hadn't been entirely sure she would. "I said I would," she replied, resisting the urge to fidget under his scrutiny. He pulled out a chair for her and she sat, her fingers tightening around the edge of the linen napkin in her lap. A waiter appeared almost instantly, pouring sparkling water into their glasses before disappearing again. Felix leaned back, studying her. "You look lovely." Olive huffed a quiet laugh. "You sound surprised." His lips twitched. "Not surprised, just pleased." Her pulse did an inconvenient little flutter at that. She reached for her glass, taking a sip before speaking. "So, is this something you do often? Invite strangers to dinner?" Felix tilted his head slightly. "I wouldn't call you a stranger." She raised a brow. "We've spoken twice." "And yet," he said, "you intrigue me." Olive wasn't sure how to respond to that. She glanced down at the menu, her fingers tracing the embossed lettering as she tried to collect her thoughts. When the waiter returned, Felix ordered without hesitation, while Olive took an extra beat to settle on something that didn't look impossible to pronounce. Once they were alone again, she folded her hands together. "Why me?" Felix's gaze didn't waver. "What do you mean?" "You could have dinner with anyone," she said. "Women who actually belong in places like this." Something flickered in his expression, something unreadable. "And yet I wanted to have dinner with you." Olive exhaled, leaning back slightly in her seat. "I don't get it." "You don't know anything about me." Felix studied her for a moment before speaking. "I know that you didn't ask for anything when I gave you my card. I know that when I walked into your cafe, you didn't treat me differently because of who I am. And I know that you're not easily intimidated, even when thrown into unfamiliar situations." Olive blinked. "That's a lot to assume from two conversations." His lips curved slightly. "I pay attention." She toyed with the edge of her napkin. "I still think this is a mistake." Felix's gaze didn't waver. "And yet you're here." She opened her mouth to argue, but the waiter returned with their first course, placing delicate plates of food in front of them. Olive picked up her fork, trying not to let her nerves show. Felix, on the other hand, seemed completely at ease, eating with the kind of effortless grace that told her he had done this more times than he could count. "Where did you grow up?" he asked, breaking the silence. She glanced up, caught off guard by the question. "Not here." "Small town, couple hours outside the city." He nodded, as if filing the information away. "And what brought you here?" Olive hesitated, debating how much to say. "Needed a change, thought the city would be exciting." "Has it been?" She let out a quiet laugh. "Not exactly. But it keeps me on my toes." Felix studied her for a moment before taking a sip of his drink. "And your family?" Olive's fingers tightened around her fork. "Just me." Something in his expression shifted, but he didn't press. Instead, he tapped his fingers against the edge of the table. "You're used to doing things on your own." She lifted a shoulder. "Some people don't get another option." Felix was quiet for a beat before speaking. "I understand that." There was something in his voice, something almost personal. Olive studied him, but before she could ask, he smoothly changed the subject. The rest of dinner passed in a blur of conversation that was surprisingly easy. Despite her earlier nerves, Olive found herself forgetting, at least for a little while, that she didn't belong in a place like this. Felix had a way of pulling her into discussions that made her forget to be self-conscious. By the time they stepped outside, the air had turned crisp, the city lights casting a warm glow over the street. Felix turned to her. "Let me take you home." Olive hesitated, then nodded. The sleek car from earlier was waiting at the curb, the driver already holding the door open. Felix gestured for her to go first, sliding in beside her once she was seated. The ride was quiet, but not uncomfortably so. When they finally pulled up in front of her apartment building, Felix turned to her. "Olive," she looked at him. His gaze held hers, steady and unreadable. "This wasn't a one-time thing," she exhaled slowly. I don't think I was expecting it to be. A flicker of something crossed his features, something that looked suspiciously like satisfaction. Good, he said, and then, before she could second-guess everything, he reached out, his fingers brushing lightly against her hand. A simple touch, but enough to send a spark up her arm. Her breath caught. Felix's voice was quieter when he spoke again. "Good night, Olive," she swallowed hard. "Good night, Felix." She stepped out of the car, her heart pounding for reasons she couldn't quite explain. As she walked up the steps to her building, she didn't dare look back. Because if she did, she wasn't sure she'd be able to convince herself that this wasn't the start of something far more dangerous than she had ever anticipated. A week had passed since their first dinner, and Olive had seen Felix every day since. It wasn't something they had planned, it just happened. He would text her a time, a place, and somehow, despite her hectic work schedule, she found herself saying yes. One evening, it was a quiet rooftop restaurant where the city sprawled out beneath them like a glittering sea. Another, it was a late-night drive that ended with them eating pastries from a 24-hour bakery while parked by the waterfront. With Felix, everything felt effortless, even though nothing about their lives should have fit together. Tonight, however, was different. Tonight, he had invited her to a gala. Olive had almost refused. The idea of stepping into his world in such a public way was overwhelming, but Felix had simply said, "Trust me," and somehow she found herself agreeing. Now, standing in front of the towering glass building where the event was being held, Olive was acutely aware of how much she didn't belong. The moment she stepped out of the car, she felt eyes on her. The women in their designer gowns, the men in their tailored tuxedos, they all looked as if they had been born into this world. Meanwhile, she was still trying to convince herself she had any right to be here. Felix must have sensed her hesitation because his hand found the small of her back, grounding her. "You look stunning," he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. Olive exhaled. "I feel like everyone here knows I don't belong." Felix's gaze was steady. "You belong anywhere I am." A shiver ran through her at the certainty in his voice. Before she could respond, a man approached them, his handshake firm as he greeted Felix. "Easton, didn't expect to see you here with company." Felix's expression didn't change. "Olive, this is Richard Hale." "Richard Olive Emerson." Richard's gaze flicked over her, polite but assessing. "A pleasure." Olive nodded, keeping her expression neutral. As Richard turned his attention back to Felix, she took the opportunity to observe the room. The chandeliers above cast a golden glow over the sea of elegantly dressed guests, the sound of clinking glasses and murmured conversation filling the space. Felix kept her close, introducing her to people whose names she would never remember. Some were polite, others curious. And then there were the ones who looked at her like she was an anomaly, like she was a puzzle they couldn't quite figure out. She was in the middle of trying to navigate a conversation with a woman who clearly didn't believe Olive had any business standing beside Felix when she felt his hand brush against hers. The simple touch was enough to steady her. As the evening wore on, she found herself relaxing not because she suddenly felt like she belonged, but because Felix never once let her feel like she was alone in this. At some point he leaned down, his lips close to her ear. "Come with me." She hesitated only for a moment before nodding. Felix led her away from the main ballroom, down a quiet hallway lined with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city. When they were finally alone, he turned to her. "You're incredible, you know that." Olive let out a breathless laugh. "Because I managed not to cause a scene. Because you don't try to be anyone other than yourself," Felix said, "even when you're surrounded by people who expect you to change." Something in her chest tightened. She had spent so much of her life trying to blend in, trying not to stand out in the wrong way, but with Felix, she didn't feel like she had to. She swallowed hard. "This world of yours, it's a lot." "I know," she searched his face. "But you don't love it, do you?" Felix's jaw tightened slightly. "It has its uses." "That's not what I asked." He was silent for a long moment before finally saying, "No, I don't love it." There was something raw in his voice, something unguarded. Olive reached for his hand without thinking. "Then why stay in it?" Felix's fingers tightened around hers. "Because walking away isn't that simple." She understood that more than she should. Before she could say anything else, Felix lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. The gesture sent a shiver down her spine. "You should know something," he said, his voice quieter now. "I don't do this. I don't bring people into my world." Olive's heart pounded. "Then why me?" Felix exhaled slowly. "Because I can't seem to stay away from you." The confession sent her pulse into a frenzy. She wasn't sure who moved first, but suddenly there was no space between them. Felix's hand found her waist, his touch firm yet careful, as if he was giving her the chance to pull away. But Olive had no intention of pulling away. When his lips brushed against hers, it wasn't tentative. It wasn't hesitant. It was everything she hadn't realized she had been waiting for. By the time they pulled apart, her breath was unsteady. Felix's thumb traced lightly over her cheek. "Tell me I'm not alone in this." Olive's voice was barely above a whisper. "You're not." There was something almost relieved in his expression before he kissed her again, this time slower, deeper, and just like that, everything changed. The night after the gala, Olive found herself standing in front of her bathroom mirror, staring at her reflection as if she could find answers there. Felix Easton had kissed her, and she had kissed him back. She pressed her fingers against her lips as if the memory of it lingered there. It wasn't just the kiss that had shaken her, it was everything that came with it. The way Felix had looked at her, the way he had admitted he didn't usually let people into his world, the way he had asked her to tell him he wasn't alone in this. She had never expected a man like him to look at her like that, and now she had no idea how to move forward. A sharp knock at the door startled her from her thoughts. She turned, frowning. No one ever visited her unannounced. When she opened the door, Felix was standing there. Her breath caught. He wasn't in his usual suit tonight. He wore a dark sweater and slacks, somehow looking just as effortlessly put together. But there was something different in his expression, something unguarded. "Felix," she said, her voice softer than she intended. His gaze swept over her, searching. "I needed to see you." Olive stepped aside, letting him in. "Is everything okay?" he exhaled, running a hand through his hair as he turned to face her. "I don't know." She crossed her arms, studying him. "That's not the answer I expected." Felix let out a quiet laugh, but there was no humor in it. "Neither did I." She leaned against the counter, waiting. For a moment he just looked at her, as if trying to figure out how to say whatever was on his mind. Then, finally, he spoke. "I don't do this." Olive's stomach tightened. "You've said that before." He nodded, his expression unreadable. "Because it's true," she swallowed. "And yet, here you are." Felix took a step closer. "That's the problem, Olive. I keep showing up. I keep wanting to see you." Her pulse quickened. "Why is that a problem?" "Because I don't know what to do with it." His voice was quieter now, rough around the edges. "My life isn't simple. It isn't easy." Olive held his gaze. "Neither is mine." He hesitated, then shook his head. "You don't understand." "Then explain it to me." Felix exhaled slowly, as if steadying himself. "There are expectations, responsibilities, a version of me that people expect to see." Olive studied him, her heart pounding. "And what about the version of you standing in my apartment right now?" His jaw tightened. "That's the version I don't let people see." She stepped closer. "But you let me see him." Something flickered in his eyes. "Yes." Olive's chest ached at the raw honesty in his voice. "Then maybe that's the only version that matters." Felix didn't move, didn't speak, and then suddenly he closed the distance between them. His hands framed her face, his touch firm but careful, as if he was afraid she might pull away. But she didn't. She couldn't. When he kissed her, it wasn't hurried or cautious, it was deliberate, like he had made a decision and there was no turning back. Olive melted into him, her hands gripping the front of his sweater as if anchoring herself. By the time they pulled apart, her breath was unsteady. Felix rested his forehead against hers. "Tell me this isn't a mistake." Olive shook her head. "It isn't." A slow exhale left him, and for the first time since she had met him, he looked at peace. He kissed her again, softer this time, before pulling her into his arms. And for the first time in a long time, Olive let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she had found something she hadn't even realized she had been searching for. The next few weeks unfolded in a way Olive never could have imagined. She and Felix fell into something that wasn't quite defined but felt inevitable. He made time for her, despite his chaotic schedule, and she found herself looking forward to his presence, the way he listened, the way he challenged her, the way he made her feel seen. The city, which had once felt like a place she was simply surviving, now felt different, warmer because it contained him, but with Felix came his world, and with his world came complications. It started subtly. A few lingering stares when they were out together. A couple of reporters outside one of the restaurants they visited. Felix brushed it off, but Olive wasn't used to being noticed, and certainly not in this way. Then the articles started. At first, she ignored them. But one morning, as she arrived at the cafe for her shift, her coworker slid a tablet across the counter. "Have you seen this?" Olive hesitated before glancing down. A headline stood out in bold letters. "Who is Olive Emerson, Felix Easton's mysterious new companion?" Her stomach clenched. She scrolled, skimming the paragraphs. They had dug into her past her small-town roots, her jobs, her lack of connections. There were questions about her intentions, speculation about why Felix would be interested in someone so ordinary. "People have too much time on their hands," her coworker muttered. Olive swallowed hard, setting the tablet down. She tried to shake it off, but the words clung to her. That evening, when Felix arrived at her apartment, she was quieter than usual. He noticed immediately. What happened? She hesitated before exhaling. "I saw the articles." Felix's expression darkened. "I told you to ignore them." "That's easy for you to say," she muttered, crossing her arms. "You've dealt with this your whole life. I haven't." His jaw tightened. "I never wanted this for you." She looked up at him. "Then why did you bring me into it?" Felix's gaze was steady. "Because I couldn't stay away from you." Her heart squeezed, but she shook her head. "Felix, I don't belong in your world. They all see it." His hands came to rest on her shoulders, firm but gentle. "I don't care what they see, I care what you see." Olive swallowed hard. "What if I can't handle this?" His fingers brushed against her cheek. "Then we find a way to make it easier, together." She wanted to believe him, she really did, but doubt curled in her chest. 2 days later, it got worse. She was leaving the cafe when a woman intercepted her, sharp heels, an expensive coat, and an expression that could cut glass. "You're Olive Emerson." It wasn't a question. Olive stiffened. "Who's asking?" The woman tilted her head. "I suppose you wouldn't know me, but I know Felix, and I know how this ends." Her stomach twisted. "Excuse me?" "Men like Felix don't settle down with women like you," the woman said smoothly. "You're a distraction. He'll get bored." Olive's breath caught. The woman gave a small, knowing smile. "Enjoy it while it lasts." She walked away, leaving Olive standing in the cold, her pulse pounding. She should have ignored it, but the words dug in deep, repeating in her mind as she made her way home. By the time Felix arrived that evening, she had made a decision. She couldn't do this. When he stepped inside, she didn't give him the usual warmth. Instead, she met his gaze, steady and resolved. "This isn't going to work," she said. Felix's expression froze. "What?" "You and me, this." "It's not going to work." His jaw tightened. "Something happened." "Your world is too much," she said, forcing the words out. "I don't belong in it, and I don't want to pretend I do." Felix exhaled sharply. "Olive, I'm serious," she cut in. "This was a mistake." His hands clenched at his sides. "You don't mean that." Her throat tightened. "I think you should go." For the first time since she had met him, she saw something crack in his expression, but after a long beat, he gave a slow nod. "If that's what you want." She said nothing. Felix studied her for a moment longer, then turned and walked out the door. The second it shut behind him, Olive sank onto the couch, pressing her hands against her face. She had done the right thing, hadn't she? Days passed, then a week, then 2. Felix didn't call. She told herself this was better, that she had made the right decision. But at night she missed him. She missed his voice, his presence, the way he listened. And for the first time in a long time, she felt truly alone. Then one evening, a knock echoed at her door. Her heart lurched. When she opened it, Felix stood there. His expression was different this time, not angry, not hurt, determined. "You don't get to decide for me," he said. Olive inhaled sharply. "Felix, no," he cut in. "You don't get to tell me I'll get bored. You don't get to assume I'll walk away." "I know what I want, and I want you." Her chest ached. "You don't understand." "I do," Felix said. I understand that you're scared, I understand that people made you doubt this, but I also understand that I love you and I'm not giving up on us. Olive's breath caught love. He had never said it before, her throat tightened. Felix. He stepped closer, his voice quieter now. Tell me you don't love me and I'll leave. She couldn't, because she did. Tears burned in her eyes. I love you. Felix exhaled sharply, relief flooding his expression. And then he kissed her. It was different this time. Desperate, certain. By the time they pulled apart, she was shaking. You're mine, Felix said, his voice rough, and I'm yours no matter what. Olive nodded, gripping his coat as if anchoring herself, and this time she didn't let go. Months later, they stood on a balcony overlooking the city, the stars twinkling above them. Felix turned to her, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Olive's breath hitched. Felix opened it, revealing a ring that caught the light in a way that made her heart stop. I don't want a life without you, he said. Marry me. Tears filled her eyes. Yes. Felix slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. And as the city glowed around them, Olive knew, without a doubt, that she had found where she belonged. With him.